When we talk about fishing in Cambodia, it doesn't differ much from region to region, being separated primarily by season and location. The season that yields the greatest catch in the rivers is in a certain month, and it proceeds with little trouble, regardless of the equipment, be it a small boat or a large one. However, if we look at the lives of those who live far from the main rivers, where do they fish? Naturally, we think of streams, stang, lakes, bueng, creeks, brek, ditches, o, and canals, prole. Yet fishing in these places doesn't guarantee a great haul all the time. In fact, in some seasons, you can barely catch enough fish for one family meal. Like river fishing, success depends on waiting for the right day and time. For other provinces, I don't know, but for my home, the happiest and most opportune time for fishing in the forests, streams, lakes, and canals is right when the new floodwaters arrive. Before the new layer of water flows in, some areas are just hot, dry, and almost completely evaporated. Consequently, the number of fish is dramatically reduced. Perhaps only the largest fish, the tough ones, manage to survive the drought until the month the riverbanks are flooded. The water then flows, seeping into the fields, wells, streams, and lakes, filling them completely. This is the time when all the fish, having hidden themselves, prepare to swim against the current, welcoming the taste of the new waters. The local people who have lived by this rhythm for so long that it has become a habit know exactly what they must do and prepare for before the water floods these areas. They must go out to secure their personal fishing spots. You might not understand this point, but simply put, it means traveling away from home to survey a specific location where they plan to set fishing gear like nets, mong, or long fishing lines, santuch. Most often, they look for areas near the edge of a lake, the forest adjacent to a canal, or remote deep forest areas that few people visit, because they believe the fish will be plentiful there. To secure a spot for setting their lines or nets, they must clear the undergrowth in the area of interest to make it clear. This prevents their nets from getting snagged, tangled, or torn once the water rises high. The benefit of going out to clear the forest for a fishing spot isn't just about reserving a location before the water comes. It also provides a large amount of firewood for later use. However, because the wood is fresh and newly cut, it cannot be used immediately. Therefore, they must gather it and store it near the entrance path. I remember that time my father and I went out to find a spot, just like everyone else. But because our mission started a bit late, the villagers had already claimed all the good spots. No problem, my father told my mother and me at dinner. There's no shortage of places, as long as we have the strength to clear them. He added that the area near Grandpa's land, right next to the old Andong Prua Canal, used to be very rich in fish. That old canal, a remnant from the previous regime, had never dried up regardless if it was the dry or the wet season. As dawn approached, my mother woke up to prepare a large packet of rice wrapped in leaves. It also included food and ingredients, but I wasn't sure what they were as I woke up after her. The rooster crowed from the straw pile as we began our trek before the sky was fully bright. I was carrying a water jerrycan and a small radio on my waist. My father carried a machete and an axe, along with a jungle basket, walking slowly beside me. We traveled on foot because the path, winding with sharp turns, small and large, high and low, made it impossible to take the ox cart. In some places, we had to duck our heads beneath the brush. Along the way, the air was intensely cold, and the mist still lingered near the forest edge. Although the moon was still clearly visible, guiding our way in the pre-dawn light, it was not difficult to see the path. As we walked further, my father kept telling me various endless stories. Every so often, I would burst out laughing loudly in the middle of the quiet forest. The rustling sound of the wind, the reeds swaying and rubbing against each other along the path, which was soft from many travelers passing during the day, caused the dust to fly up and cling to my trouser legs. Sometimes it even got into my hair. A few hours later, the red sun began to rise slowly, emerging from the far end of the forest in the east. This allowed me to clearly see the surrounding landscape, and instantly realized that we had walked far away from the villagers' rice fields. More specifically, it was a region I had never set foot in before. Even though the sun was shining brightly, my father's destination had not yet been reached. So we continued to walk further and further until we arrived at a place where my father pointed and told me, "We will take this spot to clear for our path." At first, I was a little puzzled but kept it to myself. I found the forest here quiet and somewhat frightening. I didn't think it was wise for us to risk clearing a spot so isolated from everyone else. After putting our belongings near the base of a wild guava tree, my father began to use the machete and axe to clear a path about 4 to 5 meters wide straight ahead. Soon after, my father was far in the distance. I began to walk behind him, collecting the fresh wood and branches he had just cut and carrying them to pile up nearby. Even though the sun was high, parts of the forest were still dimly lit. This made me feel a chill down my spine and uneasy. Perhaps this was because I often had nightmares about walking in the forest, and now in reality, I kept nervously looking left and right, not trusting the dark woods.
The pungent smell of dew lingered on the broken branches. I spotted a huge weaver ant nest shaped like a ball. Seeing this, I quickly tossed the firewood aside, took off the krama from my waist, and used it to shake out the ant eggs for my mother to cook. The old fallen leaves on the ground were mostly black. Some were decaying, giving rise to new life in the form of many types of wild mushrooms. They came in many colors and sizes, some as big as a dinner plate. Most of them had become a delicious meal for the large mice, which were as big as the cats in our village. With every step forward, my father was extremely careful. Especially when he saw a nest of baby birds on a tree, he would bypass it, careful not to harm them. As for me, I was truly lazy. I could barely keep up carrying the cut wood and branches. My father had already gone ahead, turning left and right hundreds of meters away, almost out of earshot, while I was still slowly carrying the wood, stepping carefully to avoid thorns. It was frustrating when I occasionally stepped on a wasp nest. They stung mercilessly, everywhere they could reach. Because of this, I vowed to get revenge. I would wait for the water to flood, and when their nests floated in clusters, I would shoot them with my slingshot. The forest was very quiet. A cold wind blew. Sometimes I would flinch when my ear caught the sound of something running behind me. Only when I turned around did I realize it was just a lizard and its siblings chasing each other. Every now and then I would look up at a tree that seemed easy to climb and was tall enough. I would scramble up to the top to admire the beautiful, vast forest view, and then take the opportunity to shout, asking my father where he had reached. After the sun was high in the sky, my father took a break from clearing the brush and returned to help me collect and carry all the wood to one designated pile. While we were gathering the wood, we suddenly heard the sound of chopping coming from nearby. Soon after, Uncle Knack appeared, having cut a path through to our clearing. Uncle Knack lived in the same village as us, only I lived at the start of the village and he lived at the end. After meeting by chance in the middle of the forest, he did nothing but laugh out of surprise, never expecting to meet us there. A moment later, Uncle Knack walked over to my father, put his arm around his shoulder, and led him away for a quiet conversation. It seemed they didn't want me to know what they were talking about, and their gestures included pointing toward the area Uncle Knack had cleared earlier. They whispered to each other for a long time, so long that I sat down on a pile of wood and they still weren't finished. I noticed, however, that the expressions on their faces were not happy. This led me to suspect that something was not right. Later, we decided to go have lunch outside, in a clearing Uncle Knack knew. I was so exhausted from walking that I nearly fainted. Thorns had pricked my hands and feet, and my body was itchy from the wood fragments I had carried. When we arrived at the lunch spot, I didn't feel very hungry because I was standing and observing the surroundings. It was incredible to think that in the middle of the forest there could be such beautiful, large trees laden with multicolored fruits next to a crystal clear canal where you could almost see the bottom.
After unwrapping my packed lunch, I hurried to eat, separating a portion onto a lotus leaf, and continued to walk and eat. The food my mother packed from home was grilled fish wrapped in a lotus leaf, along with a small bowl of fresh, pounded fish paste, prahok chen trum. As I walked, I kept thinking that it seemed impossible. Surely people must have lived here before. I saw many tall mounds shaped like the bases of house pillars. Old potsherds were half buried deep in the ground, with only the edges showing. There were also remnants of many other ancient artifacts, now almost entirely overgrown by grass and vines. The most interesting thing was the cultivated plants I only ever saw in the village, like long eggplant, taro, and papaya, growing haphazardly at the edge of the forest, next to a patch of dark, quiet soil that gave me the chills. Even though I saw so many fruits and flowers, I dared not go near them. Soon after, I finished my rice. Because the food was salty, I set off to find water, but didn't see the jerry can. My father said I must have forgotten it at the woodpile. He told me to go fetch it myself because he and Uncle Knack were not yet finished eating. Before he left, he told me to hurry back and not to get distracted playing along the way. My thirst made me forget all my fear. I walked to the woodpile, grabbed the jerry can, unscrewed the cap, and drank until my stomach was tight. After I was fully quenched, I intended to go back immediately. But when I glanced at the gap in the forest that Uncle Knack had cut through earlier, it seemed too coincidental. So I decided to take a quick look. He had worked alone, but cleared a wide, neat path, and the fresh wood was stacked in orderly piles. The sound of sparrows chirping loudly echoed from the treetops, which were gently swaying and rustling in the afternoon sun. Vines and creepers wound around the tree trunks, some bearing fruit, almost touching the sky. The forest was an enigma, full of strange and wonderful things. After walking about 10 meters, I reached a sharp corner. I wondered why he hadn't cut the path straight ahead. When I got closer, I was so startled I almost dropped the water bottle. There was a small shrine built with large pillars and roofed with old tiles. It looked like a resting or worship spot for the Arak Nakta, nature spirits. But it was strange that it was located in the middle of the forest. Furthermore, it was surrounded by earth mounds, almost turning into a termite hill. If it were still in good condition, this place would be big enough for 3 to 4 people to sleep comfortably. Instead, it had clearly been abandoned for who knows how many years. The trees surrounding the shrine were unusually large, casting a deep, dark shadow below.
As I was intently looking up and down, a few monkeys suddenly screamed, eyes wide, showing their teeth, swaying on top of a tall creeper tree about 20 meters away. They seemed startled by something below, right where I was standing. They screamed, eyes wide, jumping back and forth, agitated as if something was wrong. I started to feel uneasy and decided to leave the spot immediately. Because the path Uncle Knack had cut was not completely smooth, my steps were slow. Therefore, I kept glancing back at that spot many times, even though I didn't know for sure what had scared the monkeys. When I reached the lunch spot under the trees, I didn't feel like wandering anymore. I went back to sit near my father and Uncle Knack. I kept the previous incident a secret, not daring to tell them for fear of being scolded for wandering off without permission. Since this was a rest period, I took off my krama, rolled it up as a pillow, and lay down, listening to Uncle Knack, who happened to be starting to talk about the history of this part of the forest. He began by saying that many generations ago, he only heard people say that there was a large waterway here, used by the villagers and the jungle hunters to trade goods via boat. Now, it was unclear exactly where it was, because after many years, that large canal might have become shallow, dried up, or flattened into level ground. It was probably somewhere near this forest.
He said that as far as he knew, this area was not a village. He only heard that it was a resting place for those trading by water or for land traders like those with pottery carts, vegetable carts, or grain carts, or sometimes even carts carrying valuables, who would stop and rest briefly before continuing their journey, especially if they were delayed and could not travel through the night. In ancient times, this forest was very dense, and no one dared to wander carelessly without company or knowledge of the terrain. Therefore, they used only one designated route for traveling back and forth. I was lying on my back, mouth slightly open, listening to him, almost drooling. But when a question arose, I asked, "Uncle, why didn't people back then travel at night?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a piece of tobacco, rolled it in a scrap of paper, licked the seam, and lit it with a match, taking a puff before continuing. Because the forest was thick and far, and there was only one entrance, if they encountered a robbery or any insecurity, it would be difficult to find anyone to help. That's why they preferred to gather and spend the night together before continuing their journey.
A cool gust of wind blew, carrying heat from a distance, touching my face. The leaves of the riang tree and the wild guava shook, dropping their petals onto my body. Every so often, I heard the sound of fish splashing in the nearby canal water, which made me jump. Uncle Nok continued. In the olden days, animals were abundant. I also heard the elders say that the villagers would come almost every day to buy from the jungle hunters who came from a mysterious distance. No one knew for sure whether the hunters who lived in the forest were indigenous people or what race they were, because their speech was not very clear. Whenever they came, they would travel by boat along the canal, bringing many things like full honeycombs, tiger skins or knees, tusks or rhino horns, bear gallbladders, or pangolin scales, along with many rare medicinal herbs. They had many groups and families, and they sold different types of goods. Some boats only sold medicine, carrying roots, vines, bark, and leaves almost filling the boat. Others preferred to sell wild animals, and the villagers were often seen queuing to buy almost daily, afraid they would run out because so many people wanted to buy. Wild boar, gar, deer, python, weaver ant eggs, civet, egret, and crane were plentiful, both fresh and dried meat. Many years later, strange things, both good and bad, began to happen. This made the villagers believe that the area was watched over by a spirit or nakta. The good thing was that those who came to sell their goods made a lot of money. When groups of people came to stay, they would pray and find peace, which led someone to build a small shrine on a mound for worship, believing fervently in its power. The bad thing, however, was that some groups started quarreling. Some groups became exploitative in their trade. The forest began to be destroyed and burned in places. Moreover, many fierce, venomous animals escaped during the disputes, which sometimes led to violence and murder in the course of trading. Monitor lizards, cobras, kraits, and even black crocodiles, all dangerous animals, were rumored to have escaped and were hiding in the silent forest. After a long evolution over many years, people traveling through here began to disappear mysteriously. Sometimes, a corpse would be found with only the head remaining. Sometimes only intestines were seen hanging on a tree branch. This made people almost completely afraid to travel through this forest because the escaped animals had become so fierce. At this point, I was completely immersed in the story, vividly imagining the scenes of life and the ferocity of those animals. Uncle, why are those animals no longer seen now? And why was this part of the forest abandoned? I asked.
Uncle Nok continued, "No one knows for sure if those fierce animals are extinct or still around, because their lifespan is very long. Some, like crocodiles or pythons, can live for decades,
As for the place, it's also not very clear. We don't know what exactly happened back then. We only hear people say that the fighting, robbery, and stealing, combined with the harassment from the fierce animals, caused people to panic and stop traveling through this forest. All that remained were the houses and numerous artifacts that were buried and ruined in the earth over many years. And even where we are sitting now, if you dig underground, there are likely many human skeletons from the old days, judging by the stories. I immediately sat up straight, eyes wide, and asked him, if that's the case, won't we be in trouble preparing our fishing spot here, Uncle? He laughed and said, "That was many years ago. It won't be a problem anymore." After the long conversation ended, we split up to continue our respective work. Uncle Nock returned to the path he had cut from the beginning. Meanwhile, my father and I went back to gather and carry all the firewood to pile it up near the reong tree, right by the spot where Uncle Nock had cut through the forest to meet us. After the wood was collected and organized, my father began to tie the wood to the base of the two reong trees. He fastened them tightly to the ground so they wouldn't float or lift when the water rose. This action was to allow the wood to become waterlogged, which meant making the wood strong and not easily rotten. About half a month passed. The river water had risen even higher, overflowing and pouring into the creeks and continuing to fill the lakes, canals, ditches, and streams both near and far, creating vast expanses of shimmering water. Only the tops of the trees were faintly visible. For the first few days, my father and Uncle Nock traveled in the same direction but in two separate boats to lay their nets in the clearings they had made before the flood. My father did not allow me to go with him yet because he was afraid I would be sleepy. Setting the nets like this requires paddling the boat to check or remove fish starting from the middle of the night. This timing is necessary to return in time to meet the fish buyers at dawn, right when the sun is rising red in the east. Also, in these first few days, my father said the weather was often stormy. This caused the nets to catch a lot of debris, and paddling the boat was not as easy as when the sky was clear. Especially when returning in the morning with a large catch, it felt like his arms would break from paddling. I pleaded with him many times to let me go, but he kept telling me to wait. Sometimes, when he rested at home in the evenings, I would secretly listen to him talk to my mother about strange things he didn't seem to want me to hear. My father said that although many fish were caught in the nets, some locations had large tears in the net, several meters long, and he didn't know if it was a big fish or something else that got tangled and struggled until the net strings were destroyed. Some nights, while resting in the boat tied to a tall tree, large waves would suddenly wash over the boat. He knew very well that only he and Uncle Nock were out here, and they were quite far apart. And on the last night, a small wooden coffin lid was found floating right next to his boat. He didn't know where it came from. After hearing all those stories, I was even more eager to go and see for myself without thinking too much about the risks. About a week later, my father finally allowed me to go along. That night, we started paddling the boat together around 9 p.m. I was so happy to paddle the boat for my father while he rested in the back. Uncle Mac's boat was the same. He brought his son, Anoy, my friend, to help paddle. Although his boat had a sputtering engine, it also helped save on fuel. The light of the crescent moon after the new moon phase was bright enough to illuminate the water and guide our way, helping us avoid hitting trees by accident in the dark. The nighttime in the forest during the flood season was so quiet and isolated I didn't hear a single animal sound. I only heard the sound of the paddle as we headed west, while I watched the faint reflection of the light on the water's surface as the current flowed. After reaching our destination, we separated to rest in our respective spots before having to wake up to check the nets, remove the fish, and shake off the algae past midnight. About an hour later, my father prepared the plastic sheet in the middle of the boat, ready to pile the net on top. A small oil lamp had been lit since we set off to allow us to see things, as the moon was partially blocked by the trees. We also had a battery-powered flashlight, but my father only used it when checking the nets because the battery didn't last long. That's why he kept the oil lamp lit. Besides, it didn't easily go out or run out of oil. He said it could last almost 5 days without needing to be refilled. The atmosphere past midnight in the forest was truly silent. Occasionally, I heard the sound of a bird flapping its wings flying one by one from the treetop. As is the custom of fishermen in my area, they don't usually tie their boats deep inside the forest cover. Although it might block the rainwater, it can become stuffy and uncomfortable to rest in. That's why my father came out and tied the boat rope to a medium-sized ring tree near the entrance to the net-laying area.
I couldn't sleep, so I sat up and went to the front of the boat, dangling one leg in the water to play. My father saw me and immediately warned me not to do that. He said that in the dark night, venomous animals like snakes or catfish could swim over and bite me, causing an accident without me knowing. No sooner had he finished speaking than a thunderous roar echoed, shaking the sky. The white egrets that had been quietly hiding suddenly flew out in a swarm, startling even me who was close by. The lightning began to flash, showing its power. A very cold wind began to blow, bringing large waves that made our small boat sway high and low. In less than 10 minutes, the sky started raining lightly, but the drops felt painful on the skin due to the force of the wind, which turned into a gale. The thunder and lightning boomed as if right above our heads. At the same time as the lightning, I could clearly see all the surrounding trees swaying, leaves and flowers tearing off, scattering everywhere. The plastic sheet on the boat almost blew away, and we had trouble holding on to it. Many other items rolled and fell to the bottom of the boat. My flip-flops, hat, slingshot, small radio, and krama, I didn't know where they had been swept away.
While we were tidying up our belongings, I suddenly spotted something very black floating on the water's surface, about 10 meters away from the boat, visible only when the lightning flashed. Startled and scared, I didn't dare to shout, only pointing my finger to show my father. My father was not as scared as I was. Instead, he went to find the flashlight and the cloth covering the boat to protect it from the rain. Then he turned it on to look at that spot. Only then did he realize that it was the pile of waterlogged wood we had cut and tied down, which had unexpectedly resurfaced. Nevertheless, I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know if it was fear or some kind of premonition. After tidying up the boat, the sky still wasn't calm. The rain kept beating down without relenting. My father started pulling the fishing net onto the boat with a strangely serious expression on his face, while I was tasked with holding the flashlight. I still felt jumpy and scared for some reason. Even when my father pulled the net from the water with a large fish tangled in it, I was startled and scared because I kept imagining it might be something else. More than half an hour later, the rain continued to fall lightly on our heads, partially blocked by the trees. We had already retrieved almost half of the nets. Only one line remained at the very end. A huge number of fish were caught in the net, especially large ones, to the point that my father didn't even bother removing them yet. He intended to get the entire net onto the boat first. When we reached the spot where we had first encountered Uncle Knock while clearing the path, I felt the boat rocking and swaying more than usual. I glanced at my father, and he started slowing down the retrieval of the net, as if he was having some kind of problem. I shined the flashlight on the net's lines and clearly saw that it was being tugged violently, as if something was pulling it. A moment later, my father suddenly panicked and shouted for me to hand him the knife. He immediately used it to cut the net line and then grabbed the paddle, urgently rowing backwards as fast as he could. Seeing this, I quickly grabbed a small paddle from the bottom of the boat and started helping him row, but I couldn't help but look back at the previous spot after hearing a tremendous splash and commotion like a huge animal was struggling. Then the lightning flashed, and I clearly saw the body of a massive black snake violently thrashing, caught in the net line. As our boat was getting further away, I could still hear its low, strange roar shaking that part of the forest. I just kept paddling and crying, maybe even peeing my pants, I don't know. By some grace, Uncle Knock's boat suddenly arrived and we quickly tied our boats together. He throttled the engine to full speed, skewering away from that place with our eyes still wide with fear. After arriving home, I was sick for almost a week and swore I would never step foot in that place again in my life. Only then did I realize that the moment when I first went to clear the forest and saw the monkeys panicking, they must have seen that snake, and I was completely oblivious. If that snake had come out, there would be nothing left of me today. And it was probably one of the species of fierce animals that survived from the generation Uncle Knock had told me about, which is why it was so terrifyingly big.